Good afternoon. This is Media Center Ukraine Odessa, and we are starting today with a briefing dedicated to the punitive bodies of the occupation authorities and how they work. Our guest is Vira Yastrebova, director of the Східна правозахисна група. The floor is yours. Good afternoon. Thank you for your interest. Thank you to those who are present here and who are with us online. And I would also like to thank Media Center Ukraine Odessa for the possibility to speak today and to inform about the processes that have been taking place in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, namely forced passporting of the local population, the continued deportation of children, but in a new format, mobilization of young men to the illegal armed units, and also about other issues that the local population in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine has been facing. The occupiers continue working on the main task of the dictator Putin. This is to destroy everything which belongs to Ukrainian nationality, and they introduce campaigns to replace the local population of Ukraine. Perhaps their aim is to destroy historic memory, to destroy those people who still remember how it used to be before the spring that Russia introduced there. We've heard about the activated campaign in the mass media about passporting. What we should focus on? We have seen active issuing of passports in the occupied Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts since 2014. But back then, it was important for them, for the local population, to gain or receive passports of the illegal LDNR. And then they could get Russian passport, but without any details, without the place of residence, and without possibility of getting any benefits, contrary to what they told people in mass media about the alleged protection of the citizens of the Russian Federation. Now, the Russian Federation has changed this approach. There is order of Putin, number 921 of the 26th of December 2022. This decree envisages the forced measures to get applications from Ukrainian citizens about renunciation of Ukrainian citizenship and to get Russian citizenship. Why is it needed? They want to show to the international community and our foreign partners the narrative that the local population gets passports of the Russian Federation. And what is also important, that they voluntarily renunciate Ukrainian citizenship. This is contrary to the legal ways of refusal from citizenship, and it does not reflect the real picture of willingness of the population in the occupied territories of Ukraine. This is the result of terror that they have there. I can share some statistics details. The law enforcement bodies detained 571 people who were subjected to administrative arrest in April 2023 in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. We understand that local population, they tried to fight that, but it is very difficult for them because they have to face armed trespassers and criminals. Moreover, the campaign aimed at renunciation of Ukrainian citizenship continues in places in prisons in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Those prisoners who refuse to renounce Ukrainian citizenship are sent to a detention center, punitive detention center, or solitary confinement cell. There are also restrictions in the form of a ban on visits to relatives and the sending of transfers. Prisoners en masse refuse to write a renunciation of Ukrainian citizenship. And why is it so? This is due to the fact that if they acquire citizenship of the Russian Federation, they will be mobilized. They could be transferred to prisons of the Russian Federation. And we know how the system works in the Russian Federation. That's why Ukrainian prisoners doesn't want to get Russian passports. Moreover, they are well aware of the facts when in the temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblasts, the Russian Federation tried to change sentences, and they tried to increase the sentence for the imprisoned. Why did they do that? They did this to involve them into forced labor, because people who are imprisoned in colonies are not forced to work according to the Ukrainian legislation, contrary to the Russian Federation. That's why people try to fight against that. But we understand that the getting of information about imprisoned people is very difficult. We understand how difficult it is for them, and we understand the results of such actions. Forced passporting, what I should remind you about here. It started in 2019, but it is very important to emphasize the differences. It took weeks or even months for people to get Russian passports. But now, the occupiers have simplified the process to get as many applications on renunciation as possible. And now the procedure doesn't take more than 10 working days, so they are in haste. Together with the mentioned processes, there is also worsening of the criminogenic situation in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. These are due to the huge number of deserters who just leave the armed forces of the Russian Federation and that move closer to the border with Russia. They loot, they rape, there are increased cases of looting and thefts. Moreover, not only deserters, but so-called law enforcement officers are also known to be involved in such activities. Because they introduced illegal rules to deprive locals from their property. As for deportation, on the 27th of April, Putin's decree was signed that reflects his plans. I'm sure that they will not be able to implement this plan thanks to the armed forces of Ukraine. But what plans do they have? They want to forcibly deport people, Ukrainians, those who do not want to get Russian passports and to take their property. But it is known about the first cases of the forced deportation of people from the Lugansk region who refused to sign renunciation application and refused to get passports of the Russian Federation. We now know about 8 cases, about 8 people from Krasnodon, Anthracite, Rovenki. According to the preliminary information, they were sent to remote areas of the Russian Federation, namely Kemerovsky Krai, Tyumen region, and Tomsk region. They nationalized their movable and immovable property, and according to our sources, the occupiers will continue to deport people who refused to get Russian passports. And I can make a conclusion that the decree is kind of the information campaign to force locals to get Russian passports. And now we can already see such cases proving that their intentions are real. What else can we tell about the temporarily occupied territories? This is preparation for the so-called elections in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. The occupiers have been forcing local residents to join the political parties of the Russian Federation, as well as the organization of supporters of the Yedina Rossiya, the United Russia political parties. So they are not the members, they are supporters. The holding of the so-called elections is one of the main reasons for the rapid passporting in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. The terror and deportation of local population is needed just to cope with the protests of local. These elections in the temporarily occupied territories are necessary for the invaders to legitimize the occupation administrations in the internal politics of the Russian Federation. They understand that their actions do not allow them to control the local population and the territories as they want to control. And now they are trying to take the next measure to legitimize the processes. What can I add here? I've already told you about the forced deportation of children from the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, and now this information is the basis of the decision of the International Criminal Court against dictator Putin and Maria Belova, who is an ombudsman in the Russian Federation. The occupiers, unfortunately, have made wrong conclusions. They have changed the deportation technology of children in the temporarily occupied territories. They continue to forcibly deport children with the mandatory acquisition of Russian citizenship. But now, these activities are not public, and we know about the cases of transporting children from the temporarily occupied territories. But now the list of these children and their whereabouts are secret. The access is restricted to them. So they used to have a lot of the quite a wide coverage of such activities in their mass media, telling that they allegedly save Ukrainian children, is no more there because now these activities are restricted. I should also say that the officials of the Russian Federation began to talk about the fact that the Ukrainian passports are not taken away from the children of Ukraine. But this is not true. The children are deprived of the citizenship of Ukraine, and through the appointed guardians, they issue Russian passports to Ukrainian children. I should also say that since 2014, there has been a significant reduction of the population in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Now, we have the following percentage showing the decrease of the local population as a result of the repressive activities. I can share information about Luhansk regions. This is city of Zorinsk, Perevalsky district. The population decreased by around 65%. The city of Perevalsk in Luhansk region, the population decreased by 45%. Entrasit, Luhansk Oblast, the population decreased by 55%. Closer to the Russian border, the city of Rovinky, Luhansk Oblast, the population decreased by 40%. Now about Donetsk Oblast. Vuglogirsk, the population decreased by 50%. Snizhne, the same oblast, the population decreased by 50%. Shakhtarsk, Donetsk Oblast, population decreased by 70%, and in Debaltsevo, the population decreased by 60%. The main reasons of the reduced population include the forced mobilization, deportation of locals, inefficient healthcare system. We've already reported that during the pandemic of 2020, occupation administration introduced a ban for hospital with regard to a report of the real reasons of death. That's why the situation with the coronavirus pandemic was very severe for the local population, because the local population had no access to simple healthcare services. At the moment, the occupation administration has increased the forced mobilization in the temporarily occupied territories. But there is now the lack of human resources there. That's why occupiers now focus on younger people. And every year, they decrease the age limit for people who can be summoned to the illegal military units. Now, they can mobilize children at the age of 16 if they want to. And we understand if the parents of such children are killed and then they are brainwashed that Ukraine is to blame for that, they are not interested in educating such children. They are not interested in their future. There are no factories where such children can work. That's why there is now massive information campaign among children whose parents have been killed in the war, and they offer to sign the voluntary application to send them to the combat zone, and we are aware about such cases. As for boys of 17 years old, they now cannot leave the temporarily territories of Ukraine. There is a ban now, and we understand that as soon they are 18 or even earlier, these young people will be sent to the combat zone. These are orphans whose children were killed by the Russian Federation, and now the Russian Federation wants to send them to the combat zone. Unfortunately, the processes that we have been monitoring in the temporarily occupied Ukraine involve all areas of people's life. Local population is waiting for Ukraine to be back in those territories. They are waiting for law to be introduced again in those territories. And that's why we need to think about reintegration. And if they are forced to get passports, they cannot be brought to liability. They have their basic rights, which are protected by the Declaration of Human Rights and their Ukrainian citizenship. That's why when they are told that there will be consequences for them in Ukraine, that they will be prosecuted in Ukraine because they get Russian passports. This is not true. This is the aggressor's campaign. That's why we are waiting for counteroffensive. We are waiting for our victory, and we are looking for getting back our territories. Thank you very much, Ms. Yastrebova. Are there any questions? Good afternoon. Dmitro Dolmatov, RFI, thank you very much for sharing so much information with us. I have several questions. The first one is about forced passporting. We know that they keep in prisons not only our military but civilians. It is very difficult to find such people. But if a person is forced to get Russian passport, is it possible to return these people to Ukraine, or at least to find them? When it comes to the consequences of the forced passporting, Ukrainian, through the Verkhovna Rada, through its legislative system, has adopted the law regulating the rights of people in the temporarily occupied territories. Ukraine, as a state, does not recognize Russian passports which are issued in the temporarily occupied territories. I don't remember the precise name of the law and its number, but the law has been adopted. The legal framework that supports the position of Ukraine as the state towards the forced passporting is there. And Ukraine does not recognize the renunciation and the passports which are forcibly issued in those territories. So now, why do they force people to sign the application, the renunciation applications? They want to show that people voluntarily want to get Russian passports. But this is not true. We understand that the propaganda machine can tell us anything at once, but we understand that when people are left on their own and they every day should face armed people, a repressive machine, they cannot get medication, they cannot get education there, they cannot continue their working in the looted factories. It is difficult for people there. And there are also the lists of people working at state enterprises and factories, and they just write such applications by their own. That's why it is very important to understand what is meant by collaborators, but what is the faked forced passporting by the Russian Federation. For the locals to legitimize their invasion and to involve Ukrainians in the political environment of the Russian Federation. And that's why we need to take into consideration the clear position of Ukraine. And the local population shall have clear understanding what could be prosecuted and what could not be prosecuted, and we need to support those people. Thank you. And the second question, you have been observing the situation for quite a long time. Can you tell us about the differences in the passporting process in the eastern territories of Ukraine and in the south of Ukraine? Perhaps they are in haste because of the counteroffensives. Of course, they are afraid of counteroffensive. As for other differences, when comparing with the temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts and those territories that they occupied after the 24th February last year, the main difference is the procedure. It is more difficult for them to get their information about people, but they have introduced patrols to collect information about people in their houses. This is not a census. They just try to get information about people residing in those territories, and they also, so to say, offer, but de facto force people to sign two applications. And there is even one more application about a fan group of the Party of the United Russia, the group of supporters of the United Russia. And there is also the understanding of the local population that even after they are forced to get the passports of the illegal formations of the in Luhansk and Donetsk regions, and after that people returned to Ukraine, they were not prosecuted for having Russian passports. And now these people use these passports of LDNR, of this Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republic, saying that they have already got passports of those territories to avoid obtaining passports of the Russian Federation, because they know the cases of people who got Russian passports in 2019, 2020, 20 looking for a better life, and they know that those people were deceived by Russia and let down. Good afternoon. My name is Anatoly Kosin. I have one more question. You mentioned that in March, the Parliament of the Russian Federation adopted the law to force our people to get Russian passports. And as of the 3rd of May, 570 people had faced administrative arrest. So can you say that it took occupiers 2 months to imprison those people? Thank you for your question. And the statistics that I shared today is about April. And this is the first attempt to legitimize the passporting process on the occupied territories that started in summer 2022, when they significantly changed the criteria for people who can get Russian passports through the simplified procedure. They believe that even most people who are present here today are believed by the Russian Federation to meet the criteria to get Russian passports. In December last year, they defined the algorithm to record alleged renunciation of Ukrainian citizenship to show that people voluntarily initiate the process. And all the all other decrees, including the mentioned decree about the future forced deportation of Ukrainians, are needed to speed up the process of forcing local population to get Russian passports. Because they have planned elections for summer, and they cannot bring so many people from Rostov to those territories because the territories are quite vast, and it is very difficult to repeat what they did in the past. That's why they now use such criminal activities. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you, Ms. Yastrebova, for being with us today. That was Vira Yastrebova, Director of NGO Skhidna Pravazahistna Grupa. See you at noon. Stay tuned.